A little girl struggled to lift a helmet made of woven branches. To these little children, this seemingly uninteresting activity is enough to serve as their annual entertainment. For them, this was already one of their greatest dreams. Lorenson was holding a fishing rod that, while not particularly valuable, was certainly a fine piece. Despite the rod's worth, the hook remained perfectly still, even after sinking into the water. Not a single fish was caught, not even a tiny creature. Unfortunately, the problem is that the two children clearly don't fall into that category. Loren packed up all the fishing rods he had set up. The two children obediently closed their eyes, silently counted down to 3, and then chose to reopen their closed eyes. The instant they opened their eyes, they felt 2 heavy objects slip into their palms. When they saw the 2 gold coins, the two children's eyes were instantly and uncontrollably drawn to them. First, Loren prepared to calculate all his wealth, which was also his basic capital. Loren's first income upon arriving in this empire was his mother's inheritance, which was also his greatest wealth to date. Moreover, even if they could, Loren was unwilling to treat these things as mere wealth to exchange for resources. The specific benefits are unknown. Loren only heard that the former used most of this victory as compensation for the Erisea incident. Anyway, these things have nothing to do with Loren. Loren had neither of these things. In summary, Loren briefly outlined the available liquid funds he had on hand. A well-developed manor would be enough to be considered a city, which is Loren's current goal. Different kinds also have different living conditions and rules. Centurion simply listed what he had gained and what he needed, and began to think about what to do next. Overall, the sense of accomplishment Loren felt in this matter actually came more from saving Arashia. Loren was diligently studying new knowledge in a small book. Something was floating in the air, constantly dancing. Crafting quills with special abilities is a popular way for newcomers to magic engineering to gain experience. Loren found the quill pen somewhat familiar. Arashia's pen has a similar function, and on top of that, the user doesn't even need to write, as long as magic is infused into it. The abandoned land is a huge peninsula surrounded by water on 3 sides. The Balixmi campaign was the largest war against the monsters in recent years. In short, thanks to Toganyol, the biggest problem that had been troubling Loren for so long, land resources, was solved. Loren quietly watched the excited girl. An irregular geometric shape appeared on the new map that Arashia had just drawn. The boundaries of territories are very strict. Arashia circled another Susis, this irregular geometric shape, revealing the land that Loren's is currently actually using. Loren had already instinctively sensed something from these clearly prepared words. Twisting the pen in her hand, Arashia began to sketch simple outlines on the map. Arashia was simply speculating based on pure logic. Regardless of the reason, the girl genuinely offered Loren her sincere advice. Arashia's cheerful voice sent chills down Loren's spine once again. Arashia took another piece of paper from the bag, tucked into her waistband, with her left hand. Arashia took out the map she had just drawn, examined it carefully, and then circled it with a quill pen. After glancing at it, Loren first nodded in agreement with his idea, but then rubbed his head in pain. The farmers themselves didn't care. After all, they were former refugees, and survival in harsh environments was their instinct. Loren looked up and thought to himself. As Loren thought about the residents, Arashia also began to mention the population issue. Another group of bolder individuals would choose to venture into lands where war had just taken place. Having a powerful hostile neighbor is not a good thing. After all, befriending distant states while attacking nearby ones is a fine tradition. Loren raised his head, thinking to himself. Arashia had truly prepared thoroughly for her work. The girl put away the large pile of notes and began to organize them carefully. Loren began to think about it carefully. Arashia has proven herself to be an excellent assistant by organizing a large amount of intelligence. Is it better to invest heavily in pursuing the future, or to conservatively pursue slow, self-centered development? Loren opened his eyes again. Lorenz was sitting cross-legged on a yoga mat on the ground, surrounded by 3 incense sticks. Loren stood up and stretched, feeling his light soul return to his heavy body. Loren had just experienced another wondrous astral journey. For magicians, reducing themselves to a mere spirit is also an excellent way to hone their mental abilities. Upon hearing this, Loren sighed deeply, then reached into his robes and retrieved a fingernail-sized, glass-like crystal. Upon hearing the girl's assurance, Loren nodded heavily, then raised his index finger and slid it into his own chest. Loren's fingers, already imbued with magic, began to tremble. A smile appeared on the silver-haired girl's exquisite face. Compared to the tangible ink of inscriptions, the materials required for enchanting was much more ambiguous. Loren shattered the soul stone. Enchanters never use their own souls for enchanting, as the loss of a soul is never a good thing. With Eleanor's help, Loren completed a soul extraction technique. After several more attempts to extract souls, Loren was finally able to do so on his own, without Eleanor's help. The extraction of a soul requires taking it from a living creature, or a creature that has just died. The extraction of the soul was complete. Building upon this, meditation is a technique that regulates breathing, thereby helping mages refine even more magical power. The book covers were very old, as if they had been stored for a long time. Loren guessed that these might be the box of books he had bought for Eleanor when they first met. Eleanor turned a page of the book in her hand and then spoke. One of Loren's few virtues is that, although he may not understand what others are saying, compared to before, the Black Forest has undergone significant changes. Near this brand new forest, a melancholy young man with black hair appeared out of nowhere. Loren carried a glass of ale and wandered around the edge of the forest, as if searching for something. The young man was carrying a bottle of low-quality ale. Crow wasn't one of those people. He's just used his own methods to get a bottle of wine produced here. Next to a tree that had not yet turned to ash, a huge rock was stuck in the ground. Crow had done this often before, so he didn't mind getting mud on his hands at all. The pit wasn't empty. On the contrary, the moist soil was now filled with many things. The shattered metal fragments of swords. All 10 milliliters of this liquid is blood. The liquor was very strong. Drinking it felt like swallowing a sharp knife. Crow threw the bottle onto the soil in front of the tombstone, then turned and staggered home. In Akbor City, at the branch of the Chrysos Merchant Guild, a white-haired man wore a respectful smile. The white-haired man gently shook his head, to which Loren simply smiled slightly. Loren also began to deal with the important matters of the day. Loren had not even considered forming a guard composed of ordinary people. Loren nodded in understanding of the other party's request. Loren had also stored a considerable number of seeds in his villa in Uranus. Loren remembered the assassin who had been completely mechanically modified to hit him. The white-haired man also revealed a smile of triumph. The next moment, Loren felt a massive amount of knowledge, from easy to difficult, systematically entering his mind. Loren didn't even open the book he had received, nor did he put in any effort to study it. Loren simply held the book, and the knowledge within it flowed into his mind. Even in libraries, only bookshelves with doors have grimoires. Compared to the previous mission, which required the containment of an alpha object, this mission is significantly simpler. With a practiced deft movement, the lid of the tin box was pushed open. Following the system's instructions, Loren carefully moved his fingers. The semi-containment state means that the contained object is in a semi-dormant state. The smiling sprites that were still fluttering around transformed into a green jade pendant. The smiling elf and the faceless man's mask are two containment entities that can enhance Loren's brain power and mental strength. Loren chose these two from the containment entities that the Empire could assign to him. After being transformed into a so-called conceptual weapon, its effect remained largely the same as that of a contained object. After briefly experiencing this feeling of being possessed by a genius, Loren quickly returned to the main topic with satisfaction. Loren had now learned the language of the Dark Ages. The immortal king himself was a voracious writer. The great sage Oberon was already a legendary figure, whose story and life were immortalized in this world. Loren's tale and life were written by the even more legendary king and writer, the immortal king. With the concerted efforts of a group of workers, several huge wheel-like devices were slowly erected. Loren thought it was at least some kind of high-tech gadget. Even if Loren had a smattering of knowledge, it wouldn't be enough. Conducting a survey of the entire land is the bare minimum. Loren's schedule is now even tighter than it was during his high school years. Before he transmigrated, after rubbing his head, Loren quickly made a brilliant decision. Friend decided to hand over this difficult task to someone else. The cattle and sheep bleating softly in front of us are the focus of the transaction. Arashia was wearing a slightly different set of mountaineering gear than her previous attire. Arashia needed no salary, no job, and came to a faraway place alone. Loren gave an awkward laugh, then unfolded a piece of paper covered with illegible writing. Loren Vollerfirst has always had this little dream. In addition, at Loren's request, she is actively brainstorming ideas. Upon seeing this adorable creature, Arashia's pupils constricted, as if he had witnessed something earth-shattering. The ability to condense elements lifelike creatures is a unique and systematic secret technique of the Ikra family. The Maxix Empire is a medieval-style kingdom. Many powerful magical beasts have such strong vitality that even after they die. Iphigenia was not as powerful as this example. Loren tried eating it a few times, but his cooking skills were terrible. Belle could handle it, but Iphigenia was a difficult monster to cook. Finally, the bowl was empty except for a few large bones. The expectation that had been giant eyes vanished in an instant. Upon hearing the name, the white spirit wolf, which had been shaking its head, finally stopped its protest. During the day, Loren was diligently working for his territory, and the nights were not his time to rest either. Loren had an open book on his head. Everyone knows the latter is the correct way to learn. Loren was neither in a hurry nor impatient, and simply read the words in front of him, quietly. Loren then picked up another book, covered his face with it, and began to read more suitable and simpler knowledge. Excluding beginner spells like elemental manipulation, these are the 4 spells Loren has learned so far. Lorenz, who was carefully pondering these words, picked up the book next to him and began to read. After a while, Eleanor left the room. Loren put down the book he was holding and picked up another book from the ground. After glancing briefly at the label below the book title, Loren continued reading. Loren didn't know if this was coded or some kind of mysterious script. The title of this page was written in deep black ink. Below is a table that resembles a tree diagram. Its description is that humanity has 9 sins. After reading the descriptions of the 9 sins, Loren turned his gaze to the top circle. Loren wanted to ask Jinor. Loren didn't even want to have much contact with it. After all, one of the rules of containment objects is that the greater the reward, the greater the danger. During this period, Arahaya was the busiest person in the land. Finally, Arashia herself is someone who has extremely high standards for herself. The maids were mostly cleaning the rooms. The moment their eyes met, the beautiful girl frowned slightly. The fact that the elf king of the Balixmi Mountains was severely injured and brought to the brink of death. After taking a sip of his drink, Loren continued to ask. Loren carefully turned his head for a moment before recalling the memory. The reason it exists in his mind is because it truly belongs to Loren Walhalefus's memories. To be precise, this is the legacy left behind by the previous owner of this body. Loren was once a nobleman from a powerful imperial family. For nobles, maintaining a social circle is very important. As Loren comforted himself, he looked up at the ceiling and secretly made up his mind. A man dressed in coarse linen clothing was working in pairs with another man of similar build. Through their combined efforts, they were able to transport the cart and its contents. The head of a jackal was placed on the cart. Some are descendants of criminals who were expelled along with their families. In short, they are a group of people rejected by the empire and unable to survive on their own. Some chose to stay in the cities of the empire. Some chose to gather together, establishing small communal societies, struggling to survive, and forming organizations. War is a tremendous opportunity. In this world, besides wars between humans, there are also wars between humans and monsters. Monsters, hides, claws, and teeth are all materials for crafting extraordinary equipment. Monster meat, when cooked by a master chef, can be made into food that is more delicious than ordinary meat. Monster blood can be used to create special ink for inscribing runes. Monster liver can be used as a special food or medicine. As a result, some refugees found this way of survival. Even so, the harvest was almost insufficient to offset the expenses they had to sustain themselves. The white-haired old man, exuding leadership qualities, wore clothes that were either tattered or filthy. The old man with a broken leg remained silent, only exhaling white breath. In short, it was very peaceful. First of all, the time for autumn cultivation has arrived. Loren had previously purchased a large quantity of seeds from the Chrysos Merchant Guild. The Balixmi campaign was indeed a huge war, and it was expected that it would attract these refugees. The development of agriculture can be described as smooth, and the operation of animal husbandry is also temporarily feasible. Wood and stone can be bought. The starting lands are not lacking in these resources. In addition, there are plenty of stone quarries to extract stone by searching the wastelands. Moreover, money is also a problem. The starting point has no income yet. Arashia sighed, then continued reporting. The two rubbed their heads in exasperation and offered several solutions that only addressed the symptoms, not the root cause. The discussion proceeded quickly, and the two soon began discussing the final steps. Loren sighed, while Arashia picked up a few documents, looked at them carefully, and then asked a question. Upon hearing this question, Loren stroked his chin, then turned his head and looked towards the window beside him. Turning his head, Loren glanced at Arashia, who was working diligently, and chuckled softly. History is replete with examples of grand victories against overwhelming odds. Loren had previously traveled from the capital by horse-drawn carriage. The Maxix Empire's trains were not on the level of the Shinkansen of Loren's previous life. The entire train was composed of gears, steel, and billowing chimneys, making it a steampunk-style train. In the early days before the Golden Age began, the train in front of us is one of them. Furthermore, what Loren was seeing was no ordinary train. Inscriptions are essentially meant to be engraved on something. Turning around, a gentle woman in a smart uniform and beret smiled softly, and then spoke. Finally, the door slowly opened. Pushing open the train door, the first thing Loren saw was a soft large bed. Loren had also discovered this technology in the city when he explored the Tower of Eternal Corridor. Crow looked up blankly at the carriage in front of him. Crow had planned to sleep in and practice his combat skills. Crow yawned as he walked quickly to the rightmost bed. Loren suddenly realized what he was doing, slapped his head, and then gave an awkward laugh. Crow sighed again, speechless, and then began to tidy up the luggage around him. Arashia silently mourned for the woman she had only known for a short time. Loren found something to do. After placing the feather in the center, Loren then took out all sorts of small items from it. The core of magic crafting is to synthesize items that are inherently magical, using materials that possess their own magic. Arashia had always wanted a fine quill pen to help him write. Finally, as green light shone throughout the room, a shorthand quill pen was thus created. After picking up the suitcases they had just packed, Loren, Arashia, Claude, and a hungry white dog arrived. In addition, it is very noticeable that this big dog is getting bigger and bigger. While Loren was thinking, Arashia quietly raised her head and looked to the right of the train station. Noticing Loren's gaze, Arashia turned her head and gave an awkward smile before changing the subject. The three people and the dog walked away from the train station. Loren peeked out and looked around, quickly spotting a familiar figure. A blond man was leaning against a carriage, looking quite anxious. Loren kept touching his head and carefully checking the time with a pocket watch. Upon hearing Loren's voice, the blond man turned around and finally smiled. Loren was like a college student studying away from home, struggling to survive in an unfamiliar place. Loren didn't experience the culture shock he had imagined. On the contrary, in just a few months, Loren had genuinely developed feelings for this world and its people. Loren touched his head and smiled softly. Taylor offered his hand to help Loren carry the huge suitcase onto the carriage. Tindalos was a genuinely funny and outgoing little wolf. The luggage was placed at the back of the carriage. Loren extended his hand and shook hands with the other person, which was considered a basic greeting. As Loren began to observe his former home like a wanderer returning home, none of the owners of this villa kept pets other than horses. After all, white and fluffy fur are always appealing to most people. Tindaros, who lived in the countryside, used to eat monster meat and bones that Crow gave him. Arashia glanced at the land she had seen before, then smiled happily. Sens simply smiled helplessly, then turned to look at the last person who had come here with him. Crow was looking up at the end of the line. Crow was wearing a noble, formal suit that seemed to match his tall and slender body. The suit was made of gorgeous bright red and was embroidered with all kinds of gold threads. Taylor took out an antique key and opened the door. What appeared before Loren was an incomparably luxurious library. The library where their father usually worked was arguably one of the most important rooms in the villa. When Loren opened the envelope, a dark blue letter was revealed inside. The letter contained no words, no signature, and its sender was unknown. The reason for its arrival was also unknown. The only content and clue on the blank paper is a badge. The badge wasn't stamped. It was drawn word by word with a pen. After digging through his mind to gather information about these things, Loren finally understood the true meaning of the badge. Loren couldn't help but rub his forehead and lament the childish behavior of the person who sent the letter. Taylor curiously peeked out. Loren put the letter back into the envelope and began to explain. When the conversation turned to the formal topic, Loren coughed to indicate that he was serious. At the scene of the Belixmi campaign, Taylor smiled slightly and casually took the blueprint. Is it because of the population problem? After mentioning it casually, Taylor continued. As Loren answered, he began searching for his prey in the vast library. Loren's father was a magician. Together, They began their work in this magnificent library. As Loren thought this, he walked towards the entrance of the villa. Loren was wearing a tight white shirt, a black overcoat, and a tie around his neck. Whether judged from the perspective of Loren's past life or his present life, he is wearing a very standard suit. Since transmigrating, Loren had always worn medieval-style formal attire. The destination wasn't far, and Loren began piecing together the route from his memories. The surrounding walls were painted with silver paint, just like the futuristic, streamlined cars that Loren remembered. The light source in the corridor was not the traditional oil lamp, but neon lights. Not only its exterior, but its interior is also very similar to the tavern in Loren's previous life. Among the participants, Loren even spotted a few, who appeared to be high-ranking nobles from the Maxix Empire. The paint on the walls has changed from light silver to dark silver. Klaus looked up, and 3 figures whizzed across the sky. Crow didn't have the knowledge to identify the species of the 3 birds at a glance. Nevertheless, as a layman appreciator, Crow still felt an instinctive affinity for these birds. After realizing what had happened, Chloe and Tindalos continued walking towards their destination. The young man still looked up at the sky. The night, which should have remained peaceful, was once again shattered by howls. As Tindalos stopped, Chloe discovered the truth behind the bloody stench. The source was a thin child, lying on the ground, dressed in tattered clothes, looking like a beggar. The two were thrown apart by each other's force. She walked past Crow, and gently picked up the unconscious little beggar. The girl with sky-blue hair looked up at the 2 magnificent buildings. Arashia was clutching an object tightly wrapped in newspaper. Arashia simply frantically picked up the things she had just dropped, wrapped in newspaper, and then cried out in alarm. Arashia recognized him the moment she saw the outfit. The so-called Blood Hands is the unique name of the organization to which these members. Arashia showed no surprise at having her identity revealed. Knowing there was no point in negotiating, Arashia could only sigh softly. The opponent is not only a powerful superhuman, but also has many powerful teammates. Arashia is undoubtedly an excellent mage among the younger generation. Upon hearing the voice, the girl in sky blue was taken aback at first, then smiled happily. The only response to Loren's helplessness was a voice full of contempt. Memories retrieved from the body were ultimately just that, memories. Something was always missing. Sitting on the sofa drinking was a boy considerably shorter than Lars. His face looked like that of a teenager. Loren was incredibly beautiful, with eyelashes that fluttered like butterfly wings and eyes that curved like crescent moons. The boy has feminine features. Upon hearing Loren's response, the beautiful young man also returned a smile. Loren and his sister Nat came from the Mach family, which had close ties with the Vasilefus clan. By this time, Payful had finished their drinks. The young man was also wearing a suit. The young man, known as Varen, smiled slightly and raised the wineglass in his right hand as well. Varen's father was a great warrior, and his mother was an excellent magician. Others, ambitious and eager for advancement, chose to participate in wars, using this route to continuously climb the ranks. The Raymond family is the latter. For Varen, the war that changed his family also changed his life. Some curses are enough to kill an entire city, while others might only cause a sneeze. Some curses erupt instantly, while others might not have any effect even 30 years later. The pregnancy was less than a month, which did not affect Mrs. Raymond's fighting ability at all, and it was not even visible to the naked eye. The world has advanced medical technology. Alchemy-based potions and powerful medical techniques can easily regenerate a person's right arm after it is severed. Despite spending most of his life in hospitals, and despite losing his right arm, Varen was not ashamed of it. As a result, he quickly became a playmate for Loren's predecessor, Wall, and the people around them, who drank together. Unfortunately, this relationship was temporarily severed when Varen was 10 years old. Varen raised his right hand, which was bound with bandages, and rotated it slightly. When the bandages came off, what appeared before everyone's eyes was a prosthetic hand made of hard metal. The bionic skin is incredibly effective. Niedinger was praying intently, while Crow looked around somewhat awkwardly. He'd seat. Crow had just tied a strap around his right shoulder, carefully bandaging the wound inflicted by the bloodthirsty butcher's blade. Even Crow and the refugees living in the starting lands had long heard of him. After observing the entire church environment, Crow turned his attention back to Niedinger, who was praying earnestly. Crow clearly felt awkward talking to her, but remaining silent would only make things more awkward. Crow tried hard to stir up conversation, But Raven remained as taciturn as ever. After chatting with Raven, Nightinger also looked at Crow. Without waiting for Crow's reply, the woman continued. Tinderos, who had been lying nearby, heard its master get up. After a moment of surprise, Nightinger smiled. Several figures were gathered at the window, peering into the church interior through what appeared to be telescopes. 4 figures then leaped down from the building and entered the back alley between the buildings. Leaning against the wall, Arashia found a lemonade in some 24-hour shop. Lyriel stuck out her tongue slightly, then slipped out of Arashia's arms and stood next to her companion. The Church of the Stars stands in what is considered a bustling area of the capital. In addition to the doorplate, there is another doorplate hanging next to this building. Only adventurers recognized by the Adventurers Guild can hang up their studio, signified with special ink. Lyriel coughed a few times seriously, then took out her keys from her pocket. The next moment, the door was forcefully pulled open by Lyriel. Arashia could tell at a glance how much care had been put into the interior decoration. Frowning, Loren felt a very faint light sting his face. Clantrin could feel as if his body had been thoroughly hammered from top to bottom by a small hammer. Before he transmigrated to this world, Loren was not as wealthy as he is now. After rubbing his head, Loren began to observe his surroundings. The surrounding paint and decorations were all in rather dark colors, creating a somber and gloomy atmosphere. The tables and sofas were made of a rustic wood. The only window in the adjacent room was completely covered by brown curtains. The handprint that caused Loren's back excruciating pain was created for this very reason. After kicking Varen, Loren began to shift his perspective, observing the life around him. Loren's womanly beauty remained even in his sleep, like a beautiful woman resting with her eyes closed. Several boys were lying on the floor in extremely ugly positions, most of them snoring loudly. A few of them had their pants wet. Loren looked down and examined trousers carefully. Loren was relieved to find that the only problem with them was that they were a little wrinkled. Finally, everyone opened their eyes that trokes and saw the tragedy. Before 5 minutes later, everyone began to clean up the mess. The waiters, used to this scene, filed in and began to tidy up the messy room in an orderly manner. As for a few ill-intentioned guys, they began to check how many drinks each person had to get so drunk. Loren had no will to resist. Loren collapsed onto the sofa. Finally, only Varen and Loren, who was tidying himself up, remained in the room. Upon hearing this, Varen squeezed his mechanical right hand and revealed a strange smile. Silverfall Tavern is divided into 2 areas. The left half is a very modern bar from Roland's perspective. The people who had known each other for 3 hours walked noisily toward the door. The main body of the light was the cheetah before them, resembling solidified liquid mercury. LED lights flanked the lamp, like 2 sharp longswords mounted on this perfect warhorse. Loren's gaze was fixed on the motorcycle in front of him. Loren had an uncontrollable adolescent delusions and craves cool and stylish things to accompany him. The car's owner, Varen, nodded with satisfaction. Loren looked at the mechanical hand with a hint of envy. Varen tapped on the screen above and then smiled. At the front, Varen gently turned the handle, and his anger erupted instantly, causing even the seat to vibrate. Some adventurers who are doing very poorly will take on the job of patrolling and cleaning the city. In short, they are city management officers and cleaners. After cleaning up, he looked at Varen, who was turning his head to the side and whistling with dissatisfaction. The 3 of them entered the estate of the Vasilefus clan amidst their graycering. Without realizing it, Loren had spontaneously integrated into the life of the body's former owner. The maids were diligently cleaning the grand estate, which was far more magnificent than the Villa Uranus. Varen raised his head, his eyes scanning his surroundings, while his mouth continued to chatter. After, Wall shouted impatiently. Varen laughed as if his plan had succeeded, and then shut his mouth. The 3 of them quickly crossed the wide corridor. Unbeknownst to them, Loren's sister, Lothar, was elegantly waiting for the guests in this hall. After setting it aside, Lottl looked up and gazed at the 2 boys by the door. Lottl adjusted her gold-rimmed glasses, looked up, smiled, and greeted him. Even though it was just a greeting, Varen and Wall both took a step back, without prior arrangement. The next moment, Varen and Val made a hasty escape, as if Lottl were some kind of terrifying monster. Lothal Vasilefs is a genius. Loren crossed his legs and asked curiously. Lottl put the book in her hand into a spatial device that was nowhere to be found. Pushing the question back into his mind, Loren looked up and continued listening to his sister. Upon hearing this news, Loren gripped his chin and narrowed his eyes slightly. The gears began to slowly push against each other. The books, on the surrounding shelves, were all very valuable. Loren was standing in front of a bookshelf, struggling to stand on tiptoe. Loren reached out to help Wall get the books he wanted, and casually asked a question as a joke. After taking on the responsibility of moving the books himself, Loren asked him curiously what he was wondering about. Turning around, he saw a smiling Varen standing in front of him, holding 2 books. The so-called anomalous creatures were neither humans. To be precise, they were more like products of rumors and urban legends. Whether in Loren's past life or in this life, this is a very famous anomalous creature. Loren yawned, left his father's library and started wandering around the house. Tindalos wasn't here. Loren guessed he was playing or sleeping on the lawn of the estate. Loren gently tapped the table, and only then did Crow notice the blonde boy who was there. Loren picked up a book at random, and understood after reading its contents. Crow nodded slightly, then rolled his hesitant eyes before lowering his head. Crow sighed, then put the book aside, and looked up to look Loren straight in the eye. Upon hearing this word, Loren gently stroked his chin, and began searching his memory for related information. Apart from knowing that it is a containment entity, and has definitely reached the alpha level, after a long period of time, humankind finally saw the starlight called Hope once more. Its exterior is neither particularly poor, nor particularly luxurious. Upon opening the door, a man dressed in a long robe was already seated in a chair. Upon seeing the box, the man nodded in satisfaction. The girl called Violetta was chewing bubblegum when she heard the girl with the scythe's words. The wooden table and chairs were flattened by the big man's body. Facing the gazes of her teammates, Violetta put away her boxing gloves, scratched her head, and gave an awkward laugh. Every villa has a basement. All the precious parts of the monster had been cut off. Not content with just a careful visual inspection, Loren also reached out and, gently, the bum touched in pieces of meat. Loren gripped the heavy book with his left hand, checked its basic balance, and then opened it. The devouring spell, recorded in the Book of Oberon, is the most difficult magic Loren has ever seen. The incantation left by the immortal king was quite complex and difficult to understand. Its originally fair skin had turned charred black, and blood was gushing out of the wound like a fountain. Loren had just cast a tree skin spell on himself to enhance his defense. Loren took out a bandage soaked in a special medicine for treating explosion injuries. Undoubtedly, even those who don't understand magic can see that this experiment has failed. The healing power slowly began to envelop the rotting hands, completely covering them. The light of cleansings slowly spread out and began to slowly clean up the surrounding flesh and blood. Loren locked the door with the needle in his hand, then carried his suitcase upstairs to his bedroom. After all, survival is difficult in any world. Taiwanese novel websites are super convenient. Enjoy them anytime. Violetta turned on the room light, glanced at Lyriel who was already lying in bed, and smiled helplessly. A figure as red as a shadow instantly appeared on the bed. The girl's mouth was instantly stuffed with butterfly pastries. Agate Firm is a newly opened firm, and its members are 4 recent graduates. For such a newly established firm, accumulating initial reputation and assets is the most difficult task. Upon hearing this, Lyriel, who had been complaining, suddenly shut her mouth in embarrassment. Finally, under Arashia's increasingly strange gaze, Elfrena, who had been watching the whole thing unfold, reluctantly began to explain. With their mournful cries, the horse and rider crashed through the meadow fence and charged forward with unstoppable momentum. Crow reached out and hugged his partner, with whom he had been training for some time. Taylor smiled slightly, then took out the booklet and began to read. Sitting on a chair beside the meadow, Loren, holding a notebook, looked up and gazed at the scene before him. Loren chuckled softly, then lowered his head to continue thinking. Even if there were some minor troubles, they were mostly resolved. Opening it revealed a map resembling a town map. Taylor had been asked to refine, are now complete. As for his father Clifton, Loren had never seen him. Feeling something fall on his head, Loren closed his notebook and looked up at the sky. The unit conversions for months and years are exactly the same, even for the special cells of February. The streetlights, which normally turn on at 7 p.m., were already lit at 7 a.m. this morning. Many carried large bags and small packages, which from the outside appeared to be items for decorating their rooms. The blazing sun, as if acting as a guide, is leading itself toward an unpredictable future. The new year is almost here. Loren cried out in frustration for a moment, then continued walking forward. When Loren was a child, Only her father in the Vasilevs family was entitled to receive this invitation. In other words, for a period of time, Loren was the only Vasilevs member who was unworthy of this invitation. After rubbing his eyes, Loren lifted his dizzy head and opened his eyes. Loren's skin was as fair as a woman's. Loren's tall, slender figure, while not quite at a model's level, was still enviable among ordinary people. Loren smiled gently at him. A girl with sky-blue hair walked out with cat-like steps. The two stared at each other for 3 seconds. Moreover, from any perspective, the girl was undeniably beautiful. As an art enthusiast, Loren Spicine could sense that the girl had carefully chosen her outfit. Nodding slightly in agreement with Loren's guess, Arashia began making final adjustments as she spoke. Violetta, who had been eavesdropping from behind, reached out and hugged Lyriel from behind, asking curiously while laughing, "Horse-drawn carriages have been a common mode of transportation in the Maxix Empire since its founding. Especially for some wealthy families, it is even possible to directly purchase tamed magical beasts, even though they were not low-level magical beasts known for their speed. Through special technology, the interior has been made significantly larger than the exterior." Seemingly unaware that there were other people in the car, Loren couldn't help but laugh as he watched the little girl stammer out her words. After releasing his grip, the boy turned to look at Arashia. Only after satisfying her curiosity did she stop, and then gave Loren a salute. Loren chuckled softly, then raised his head, his eyes gleaming with approval. Lily is a very obvious positive character. Violetta and Lyriel are similarly passionate. The four have contrasting personalities, too cold and too warm, and as a standard 4-person adventure group, Loren had considered many answers but never one so naive yet undeniably so. When Loren came to her side, the blue-haired girl coughed lightly as if she had expected it. Before them stood a massive glass door, protected by 2 heavily armored guards. Crow just stared blankly at the vast array of vehicles in front of him. The carriage window had just been turned open. Next, the coachman, who was wearing a bird beak mask, took a moment to stop the carriage. When she saw Crow, she smiled gently as a greeting. Upon hearing Crow's reason for being there, Niedinger first gave a slight smile, which he quickly wiped away before speaking. The girl wearing the bird beak mask appeared behind them, without them noticing. The reason the group first met, the child being chased by the bloodhound, was that night. Loren then led the other 4 girls through the unfinished corridor and finally into the hall. Next, the group arrived at the first floor of the palace. Having visited this luxurious palace before, Loren wasn't as surprised as he was upon first meeting it. Sip smiled helplessly, then turned around and began looking for anyone he knew at the banquet. Without the barrier of gender, this obstacle was noticeably more solid. Arashia removed the rose from her mouth and bowed respectfully. Today, Sina Mafa is wearing a custom-made Western-style suit for this grand banquet. In the present empire, the most famous nobleman is undoubtedly Marquis Cliffin Vasilevs. The Mafa family, to which Sena Mafa belongs, is a genuine hereditary ducal family. Furthermore, normally speaking, although that title is hereditary, only one position can be passed down in the end. After all, not all noble families are like the Vasilevs clan. Their offspring each have their own dreams. Arashia is arrogant, willful, and by no means a likable person. Sena Mafa may have forgotten one thing. Most people don't know that Arashia chose to leave the family voluntarily. To be precise, arranged marriages were not uncommon in aristocratic circles. In fact, they were quite common. Even though she kept telling herself to remain reserved, Arashia couldn't help but frown at this behavior. The blonde boy in Sue in the well-fit suit had appeared beside them at some point. As Arashia stepped back, Val and Varen also appeared to support Loren on his left and right sides. As for Sena Mafa, he couldn't help but frown the moment he saw Loren. After all, unlike Arashia, Loren and Sena Malfurion had a genuine minor disagreement at the Dark Fortress. Along with this look, he took a step forward, bringing his body closer to Loren. Loren would not allow himself to stand idly by when his friend was in trouble. At this point, the two were so close that they were almost touching, like lovers kissing. The two, who were about the same height, stared at each other with sharp eyes. The sound of high fives rang out. The two, who were almost touching, retreated in unison. Loren turned his gaze away and focused intently on the smiling woman in the long robe. The current Loren has not seen the girl's true identity. The cult of the star gods is a large religion that is widespread and recognized throughout the world. As a result, its churches are found all over the continent. The Maxix Empire and the Technologia Federation are the two largest countries in the world. Turning his head, Loren saw the girl wearing a birdbeak mask who had unleashed a sharp red sword strike. Adjusting his perspective again, Loren saw Crow, who had somehow appeared beside him. Crow was leading the large white wolf on a rope and whistling behind it. After a brief exchange, Niedinger looked at Crow with a smile, completely different from these luxurious outfits prepared for banquets. Not to mention Wall, even Loren and Sina trembled instinctively when they saw the woman in front of them. Not to mention that the other party is not just a simple teacher, but the principal of a school. Just one sentence was enough to make Loren break out in a cold sweat. The girl in sky blue tilted her head first, then gave Loren a slight smile. Taking advantage of this moment of daze, Arashia turned her head back to look at her mother. 3 minutes later, the conversation ended even faster than Loren had anticipated. Arashia, dressed in a formal gown, and the woman still wrapped in her school uniform, returned to the corridor. Originally, he came to support Loren, but he suddenly saw his former principal and the examiner of his future thesis. Before she returned, he pulled Loren back to the banquet hall. In the end, only Loren and Crow remained. Leaning against the wall, Loren stroked his white beard and slowly walked out. To the right of this man was Cliffin. In a power ruled by a single individual, each member may have a specific role and be indispensable. For Loren, before this, he had only heard some unverified information from his daughter and his father. Loren was also the father of Senamafa. For a grand banquet, food and wine are merely the most basic necessities. The banquet began the moment the appointed time arrived. Hungry people began taking food from the tables, while Loren and Arashia chatted happily. Senna Malfa watched them with a gloomy gaze. After exchanging a few words with Loren, Arashia left with her wineglass, and Wall disappeared without retrace. Loren smiled and extended his hand. The boy in front of me, who is about 1.5 meters tall, is one of the friends of Loren's predecessor. Loren was met with a solid kick. After taking a swig of red wine in frustration, the boy looked up and asked curiously. When Loren brought up the topic, the little boy became even more depressed. Loren chuckled softly, then recalled the time when he had just transmigrated. Loren's response was a shiny gold coin. Arashia took another sip of her cocktail before placing it on the bar. The girl remained silent, beginning to recall what had happened. Sitting properly in his chair, Loren took the initiative to start a conversation. Arashia chuckled softly, while the astute bartender standing beside her skillfully began her performances. Loren took a small sip, then couldn't help sticking out his tongue. Loren took another taste of the wine. For a long time, Loren felt that the girl's smile was like that of a fox. Elena rushed to the girl with lightning speed, her already nimble hands moving like they were powered by a motor. In no time, a bright red cocktail appeared before the three of them. While Loren was marveling at this, the girl had already picked up her cocktail and started to enjoy it. While another girl was tasting her wine, Arashia was swirling her glass with her finger and asked thoughtfully. Loren remembered the things his sister had mentioned to him. The girl nodded gently in response. Upon hearing this, Elena smiled the happiest smile of the day. Arashia placed the wine glass back on the table and continued. As they finished speaking, they both took a sip of their cocktails. After a brief silence, Loren finally couldn't hold back and opened his mouth to ask. The cocktail in the glass was empty. New guests took their seats at the bar, one by one. Loren and Arashia stood up, left the small bartending station, and returned to the grand banquet stage. Arashia found a mirror at the banquet and quickly adjusted her orange dress. Loren, dressed in a suit, glanced around and saw a group of people gathered in the corner. After removing the artificial mechanical Varen revealed the mechanical hand. Brigitte, on the other hand, curiously played with the other person's right hand, as if it were a new toy. Loren smiled and walked over, and Arashia followed him. Arashia smiled gently and extended her hand as a gesture of goodwill. Roland took the book and flipped through it casually. Varen, who had been watching Roland's behavior, finally couldn't help but ask out of curiosity. Loren had previously encountered an assassination attempt in Akbar City, and through this opportunity, he met Elenoya. According to Elenoya, these prosthetic bodies are precious materials in themselves. Upon hearing Loren's words, Wall, who was standing to the side, nodded in agreement and said something in responses. In other words, the New Year's celebration is about to enter its second half. The Maxix Empire is a martial nation that encourages healthy combat. Private and official arenas are as ubiquitous as internet cafes throughout the Maxix Empire. The magnificent environment was not unexpected for the young man. After carefully observing the unusual arena, Loren then turned his gaze to the interior of the arena. Normally, a duel is described in formulaic terms as a one-on-one fight. Death matches are rarely allowed in the arena. While there are they are generally precedents, are generally not considered a regular option. Once the lives of the fighters are ensured, the next step is to determine the participants. The two hands moved back and forth in front of his face, startling Loren, who had been lost in thought. After apologizing, Loren looked around. Loren also looked up at the two players, who were ready to enter the arena. Violetta smiled indulgently, while Elfrana interjected indifferently. Even though adventurers are known for their unstable profession, most people still yearn for job stability. In this case, signing a long-term contract with a wealthy nobleman is the best solution. Even if they feel their luck isn't bad today, this is not something that can be achieved simply by luck. One side was an elegant man dressed in a gorgeous light blue robe. While the four were chatting quietly, the battle was gradually reaching its climax. The pale blue-clad man charged forward like a gust of wind, gracefully dodging the flying purple crystals. After nodding in satisfaction at the conflict between the powerful individuals, Lyriel excitedly turned her gaze around. Even though the competition had reached its most intense moment, the boy was wearing a distinctive suit. As they drew closer, their voices became even clearer. Loren was in a good mood today. The reason he had deliberately provoked trouble before was because the other party had also friend his Arashia. In short, facing the aggressive Senamafa, Loren was now nothing but troubled. Upon hearing Senamafa's words, Loren revealed a strange smile. Everything's designed to serve the audience, making it the most competitive type of duel. Upon hearing this, Senna frowned and began to seriously consider it. Just when Loren thought he was about to fool them, an angry voice suddenly rang out. The boy's fierce declaration of war shattered Loren's beautiful dream. Upon hearing Bujilita's insults, Senamafa was stunned for a moment before taking deep breaths to compose himself. The boy wanted to say something. Its white belly was completely exposed. Taiwanese novel websites are super useful, read easily with Tal. In this perilous animal world, such an action by wild animals is symbolic. Various unique patterns, materials and food were all specifically for magical beast pets. Tindalos, who had been resting, tilted its head and began to chirp. Ignoring Crow, Tinslow continued to roar as it rolled off the straw mat. Without hesitation, it quickly stood up and charged toward the gate, barking at Crow as it went. After determining the format of the competition, the two began to discuss the specific details. Knowing he couldn't avoid this big trouble, Loren nodded dejectedly. Senamafa nodded arrogantly and then spoke. The coordinates are probably deeper than the ruins of the Dark Fortress. Bujilita scoffed dismissively, then turned to discuss the matter with the intrigued Varenwal. Sibtan struggled to suppress the rage within him that made him want to chop Bugarita to pieces. Upon seeing the duel agreement finalized, Senamalfa finally smiled. Loren turned his head and swept his eyes over the crowd with ill intent. Arashia, who had been standing to the side watching, peeked out with a grin. Curious, the girl peeked over the railing and carefully gathered information, eventually figuring out what had happened. The tall woman nodded and turned to leave. Crow chuckled softly, turned back to look at Loren, and said seriously. As Senna Marfa looked up at the scene with satisfaction, a boy of similar age hurriedly came over. The arena was originally an empty flat area. The width of the two grass paths is only about 1/20th of their length. In this world full of fantastical abilities, this is a less entertaining, more rigid, and more standard nightly competition. Crow's purple scythe, crackling with lightning, transformed into a lance, which the black-haired youth gripped tightly in his hand. Both sides just needed to charge at the same time. Crow released his grip on the spear. At this point, both sides had reached the end of the walkway. Crow knew how poor his riding skills were. After only a month of training, the two turned around and launched another attack. The warhorse, on the other hand, was different, facing a predator whose ferocity was ingrained in its blood and who was born to be superior. Crow felt as if he had become a centaur from the story. Turning his head again, the white-haired youth looked cautiously at Crow, or more precisely, at Tindalos below him. The third charge began, and for victory, the two knights once again brandished their weapons. At some point, the enemy's weapon had changed from a lance to a sickle. The state of man and horse, as one was forcibly interrupted. Clearly, the black-clad youth was in a more embarrassing position, but this battle wasn't decided by individual actions. Elena, who had just organized this betting pool, was equally pleased. Even after deducting the spoils given to the winner, the amount they wagered was still a profit for Elena. Among all those who were angry or furious about the outcome, Loren first covered it up with a violent cough, then straightened up and looked directly at his ally. The bandage, soaked in healing potion, was the best tool Loren had for healing external wounds. Upon hearing this, Loren paused for a moment, then nodded and said seriously, "For instance, the first duel between the white-clad youth and Crow directly used the rules of knightly combat. Everything is decided randomly, and the only known factor is incapacitating the opponent. The few rare instances in history where both sides fought to the death were examples of ruleless brawls. The glass bottle and cork were the same as the one containing the old parchment. With the stakes set, the duel is about to begin." By this time, the conflict between the two had escalated significantly. Not only the first floor, but also the second, and even the third floor, were now packed with people. Something suddenly appeared in front of me. Suspecting it was a hallucination, Loren blinked again, rubbed his eyes carefully, and then opened them again. Loren was familiar with these three patterns because he had seen them in a book he had just acquired. Three sins were now manifested in Senna Marfa. Grass that had absorbed nutrients began to grow. Loren rubbed his head and fell into deep thought. Loren began to breathe gently, allowing the tension that had spread through his body to dissipate. Loren patted his cheeks lightly with both hands and then began to act. Loren then swung the axe and began chopping down the surrounding trees. The magic-formed weapon was sharper than an ordinary axe. Just like in the previous exhibition match, the two powerful adventurer knights did not have a significant difference in strength. The size of the arena in the no-rule brawl is random. The mage is a highly adaptable profession, just like it is now. A bad feeling made Loren frown. The silver blade in its right hand was now relentlessly aimed at Loren's neck. Faced with the sudden attack, Loren remained calm. Loren took a step back and simultaneously unleashed a magical light as a shield. Warriors and mages are the most basic classifications of extraordinary professions in the Maxix Empire. When it comes to pure burst damage, Loren is reminded of the legendary swordsman, who often appears in epic tales. Loren held a long knight's sword in his right hand. After just one glance at the opponent's equipment, Loren quickly gathered information about the opponent's fighting style and abilities. Undoubtedly, this is the most moderate, the most balanced, and the least flawed choice. In other words, being moderate and balanced is mediocre. Loren simply leaned forward and held his shield horizontally in front of him. Accompanying these swords were sharp blades formed from wind. Loren used his shield in his left hand to block the invisible wind blades. The dominant emotions were rage, pride, jealousy, and a slight gluttony. Similarly, there are more flaws. Loren took a deep breath, roared, and charged forward. The raging flames had engulfed Senna Malfurion's entire body. At the same moment this emotion erupted, a strange smile appeared on Senna Malfa's lips. From the moment he saw the shield flare up, Loren had already suspected that the sword must so conceal something. Senna Malfa, who had already blocked the ball of light, also didn't have many injuries. Loren scanned the armor on his opponent again, realizing why his attack had been ineffective. Senna Malfa's thoughts were interrupted by Loren's attack. The longsword, enveloped in lava, did not stop there. Senna Malfa continued to swing it. The invisible wall formed primarily using pure, spiritual power is one of the new spells Loren learned this month. The force field wall blocked Senna Malfa's attack, but it also prevented Loren from attacking him. To this end, Loren gently closed his eyes, then opened them again after 3 seconds. Coincidentally, in order to counter these close-range combat techniques, Loren had recently learned a new spell. Senna, who had already assumed a combat stance, suddenly realized something was wrong when he saw Loren's golden eyes. Loren was unable to move or wield his weapon. Senna Marfa's equipment was chosen to target elemental and physical resistance. The opponent's sword and shield were first bound by the ropes in Loren's hands. Loren yawned, turned, and headed towards the exit to get some rest. With just one glance, Loren figured out why these guys were celebrating. Standing before him was a young man dressed in a luxurious suit similar to Loren's. Loren appeared to be only in his early 20s, possessing a dreamlike, perfect physique and face. Upon seeing Anchoret approach, Chrysos Kane chuckled softly, then turned and left. Several mysterious gems were installed on the iron gate leading to the ruins of the Dark Fortress. The colors red and orange, symbolizing celebration, were not removed with the arrival of the new year. On the contrary, most people began to joyfully hang all sorts of celebratory decorations in front of their doors, whether they are ordinary residents or nobles of the empire. Loren smiled and then got into the carriage. Even though a rare, alpha-class containment entity appeared, even disregarding this, they gained various kinds of knowledge, wealth, and containment entities. The promotion of a title is not just nominal. Led by his elder brother, Loren made his way toward his goal, while observing his surroundings. After circling around again, they arrived at a research table-like area. A blonde woman wearing a white lab coat was diligently filling out something on a piece of paper. The girl waved to Loren and stood up, spotting a stack of documents. Loren frowned when he saw the distance between this land and his starting point. Vesta, on the other hand, turned to look at Loren. The selection of a containment subject is quick. The new year has arrived. After standing up and stretching, the boy opened the door to the room from the inside. After handing the envelope to Loren, the maid bowed and then withdrew. Loren deliberately left his room door unlocked, as a crucial milestone was reached. After turning a corner, the two arrived at a fork in the road. Some were professional books that described techniques for using magic. Loren stared at the name, then sighed. The maid who was cleaning the house saw Loren. The Chrysos Chamber of Commerce is the world's largest chamber of commerce. Before heading to the starting point, Loren made a point of purchasing some necessary items here. The woman gave a slight bow, then led the two into the VIP room. At the back of the hotel, Loren and Arashia were already seated in the guest seats. Not to mention Arashia, who clearly had a wealth of wine-tasting experience, standing next to him. After the light faded, what was revealed was a round pale white food surrounded by ice. Seemingly because ice cream didn't exist in this empire, Arashia and Elena both looked puzzled. The waiter beside them coughed twice and began to introduce the name of this dish. Loren felt it melt and swallow without even moving his teeth, just by sweeping it with his tongue. The next dish is sashimi. After the appetizers and drinks are served, the main course will follow. On the left side of the table were 2 lobsters, baked in wine sauce, each larger than the plate. On the right side, a plate displayed a small mountain of T-bone steaks, supposedly made from specially raised beef cattle. The tender beef was grilled to medium rare and then drizzled with black pepper sauce, emitting an irresistible aroma. As for Loren, he had already started cutting the fragrant steak in front of him with his knife and fork. Elena cleared her throat and began her earnest introduction. Upon hearing Loren's assessment, Elena first nodded seriously, then shook her head. At this point, even Loren, who didn't know much about business, seemed to have understood Elena's meaning. After taking another sip of wine, Elena continued. Loren put the boneless steak into his mouth, and Arashia nodded before asking the next question. After the last dessert was served, Loren and Arashia, the guests, took their leave. Only Elena, the tall woman, and a table full of leftover food remained in the private room. Elena finished the last sip of wine in her glass and smiled with satisfaction. Lotte had already tied her hair up in a ponytail. She then turned her head and looked at Loren earnestly. Lotte blinked her bright red eyes and stared intently at Loren's hesitant green eyes. Even so, after hesitating for a while, Loren looked at his sister with a determined gaze. After turning the page of the notes, Lotte continued. After saying that, the girl's tone changed from relaxed to serious. When Loren took it, he found that it contained a series of mysterious numbers and patterns. Loren recalled that in the past few days his sister had suddenly and inexplicably missed the New Year's banquet. The girl took out the box of cosmetics again and began to carefully dress herself up. Loren put the papers away, looked up, and sighed helplessly. The opening of the can was created, as if compressed, and a burst of pungent bubbles sprayed onto Loren's face. Loren's previously calm body suddenly felt hot, and his heart began to pound. In a sense, the energy drinks in this world are also such things. The waiter behind the counter respectfully took out a newspaper that was tightly bound with a rope. Loren had just unfolded the newspaper in front of him when the eye-catching headline caught his eye. Today this confirmed news has been rushed to the front page by major newspapers. After hearing someone call his name, Loren curiously looked up, but he couldn't see anyone at all. After putting the newspaper away, the two walked side by side down the street. After handing a brand new receipt to Loren, Bujilita, who had been dragged out for a walk, couldn't help but yawn. Bujilita rubbed her head in annoyance, while Loren simply smiled and continued walking forward. The two were silent for a while. Then, Bugirita took the initiative to start a conversation. Upon hearing Bugirita's words, the smile that had vanished returned to Loren's face. Tonight, a loud clanging and banging sound came from a model apartment that looked no different from the surrounding houses. The sound was so loud that passers-by, walking by the door or the neighbors living next door could hear it. Ignoring the three people's exasperated expressions, Lyriel, having finished cleaning, took out a handmade photo album from her backpack. The album's cover was made of special monster hide. Upon hearing this, the other two girls sighed helplessly and then continued to pack their bags. Before long, most of the items had been stuffed into the bag. The hooded girl took the gold coin and smiled happily. Violetta, who was the main person moving things, had just laboriously carried the 4 large bags to the group. The 4 of them walked side by side toward their common goal. In the center of the land is a 3-story building made of stone bricks and wood. Arashia began to study where to best place the vase she brought from the capital. After taking a sip of his sweet tea, Loren looked at the 4 girls sitting in front of him. The 4 girls sat properly on the sofa opposite Loren and nodded. Lyriel, who was in the lead, took the initiative to speak. Upon hearing Loren's question, Lyriel raised her right hand and said seriously, "The abilities assessed were extremely diverse." Lily carefully examined the paper Loren had written last night, then nodded. Alfrena Serene and Violetta, already used to it, shrugged helplessly and then rushed out of the house together. Loren gave a helpless smile, then sank into the sofa, as he had set to begin his rest. Loren nervously reached into his pocket, then remembered that it was stored in his spatial ring. Upon seeing the lily, Eleanor was initially taken aback, then happily accepted the vase from Loren. Loren had nervously put his hands behind his back. Loren wasn't the kind of nobleman who was particularly adventurous. Even though he had seen this girl many times, each time, Loren was still amazed by her indescribable face. The beautiful, young woman before him always made Loren feel a sense of tension in his heart, even though it was just a simple glance. Eleanor blinked and smiled with satisfaction. After hesitating for a moment, Loren leaned against the wall and took the initiative to ask a question. The room remained the same. Feeling like he was seeing things, Loren rubbed his head helplessly, then closed the door and left. Loren took the document in front of him. At the same time, Loren's hands were not idle either. Loren took out pieces of paper filled with writing from the surrounding area and began to revise them himself. Loren continued writing while chatting with her, as if they were having a casual conversation. The so-called crustal movement and the introduction of rivers are as merely superficial manifestations. For the land of origin, these land resources are the greatest wealth of this manor and this territory. The environment, climate and geology determine that different regions have different unique products. Loren placed his hand on the ring of Floga and took out a piece of paper folded several times. After carefully searching through the Floga ring, which served as a spatial storage device, Loren quickly found 2 glass bottles. Placed on the table, 2 glass bottles, roughly the same length as wine bottles, stood upright before it. Loren pulled the cork off the first bottle with his hand and took out a long piece of parchment. "The girl in front of me is the perfect fit for this role." Such opportunities were rare indeed. After hearing Loren's words, Arashia nodded and sat back in her chair. Arashia smiled slightly in agreement with Loren's answer and continued writing on it. Loren fully unfolded the drawing in the bottle and began to carefully examine the parchment before him. Loren took out 2 maps, one showing the abandoned land before and after being affected by Jignal's power. Loren then took out a large sheet of white paper. The quill pen is incredibly fast. Crow had been working continuously on this plot of land since 6 o'clock this morning. The practical manifestation of this enhancement of one's physical vitality is an improved physique. The old man took 2 flatbreads and drank them with water. By this time Crow, whose teeth were better, had finished the noodles that had been served to him. Upon hearing this, Crow shrugged helplessly, then nodded in agreement. Crow also raised his head. After lifting his foot and rubbing it, Crow then raised his head and looked toward the source of his voice. Loren held a glass bottle in his left hand and made a telescope gesture with his right hand. Beside Loren, 2 women stood on his left and right. Having received no response, Loren turned around. Loren remembered that the girl had been sullen ever since she received the letter that morning. 2 or 3 days later, Loren returned to the side of that great river once again. The slender, 2-masted sailing ship remained moored at the bow of the river, awaiting a sailor to take the helm. Loren had come to the riverbank not today to test the waters on this ship. In the end, only Loren remained, sitting on the rock waiting for the guests to arrive. The blonde boy looked up, to find the source of the sound. After disembarking from the ship, Elena looked around curiously, especially at the vast river and the fertile lands surrounding it. The girl chuckled softly, then looked around and asked curiously, "Is there a problem with this?" Inside, the empty room opened by the maid. Upon seeing Loren enter, the girl turned around and stood in front of her, asking curiously. Elena snapped her fingers, and a soft sofa was placed in the room. Once again, Loren felt envy, jealousy, and resentment towards the wealthy dog in front of him. The lock and the door itself shattered, revealing the goods inside to the two of them. Loren was not yet at that level of power. After the container was torn open, the goods inside were neatly and securely arranged. Elena took out a waterproof box from the innermost part of the box. Even a layman could tell that these were quite precious and delicious red wines. Loren's mind was completely occupied by the precious wine and money. At Elena's request, Loren led the girl, who was visiting, for the second time, on a thorough tour. After rolling her eyes, Elena took the initiative to make a proposal. After listening, Loren nodded somewhat strangely, and then asked another question. The wind appeared in an instant and disappeared in an instant. The girl, using magic, turned the candle. Dinner was already laid out on the round table in the center of the living room. After handing the two letters to Anna and Loren, respectively, the maids returned to the kitchen to begin processing them. Today's headline news isn't the sudden appearance of a dragon that Loren was more curious about. The problem was that Bloodhand was a malignant tumor that had already taken root in the Maxix Empire. While Loren was reading the newspaper, Elena opened her envelope and took out a book. Elena held up the book in her hand for Loren, who was sitting opposite her, to appreciate. The title, displayed in stylized lettering, is located at the top of the cover. The familiar name made Loren frown. Arashia, who was sitting next to her, also took the initiative to join the conversation. All three people were simultaneously drawn to the aroma, their senses and minds captivated by it. Loren felt that the originally harmonious dinner party had become much more tense in the room because of Eleanor's arrival. In the end, it was Elena who took the initiative to break the peace. Loren had not forgotten that the incredibly beautiful girl before him was actually a genuine witch. Arashia is one thing, but she doesn't believe Elena would willingly conceal this secret for her, because of their cooperation. The reason for this is that the two share a common interest. The cover was exactly the same as the one Elena had taken out earlier. The girl excitedly reached out her trembling hands to grasp the book that Eleanor offered. Arashia, who hadn't said much, also returned to her room without a word, as did Elena. Loren knew that the creation of puppets was one of the secrets of a school of magic. The girl sighed and looked away from the puppet. Loren waved and led the three back to the Uranus villa. Loren took out a large bunch of keys from the ring of Floga. On the contrary, the basement, which is now full, has had to be divided into several sections for classification. After opening the wooden door, the three of them saw the wood that had already been cut and bound together. The girl opened a few more sections, checked the amount of clay and stone, and nodded in satisfaction. Firing clay into bricks that can be used in actual construction is not a simple matter. In the technologically advanced Technoroia Empire, the same applies to wood and stone. After certain processing, can they be transformed into qualified building materials. Loren was lying on the sofa in the room, listening to Arashia's report and nodding in response. After a quick glance at the data listed on the drawing, Loren nodded and responded with a satisfied expression. Arashia nodded in agreement, but followed up with a new question for Loren to define. In the end, only Loren was left in the room. While Loren was using his consciousness to control the quill pen, he wasn't idle either. Loren took out a bottle of bright red liquid from his pocket. Anyone who had ever been to the dark world would know that this was the unique smell of blood. Loren took away the empty ink cartridge and placed the new ink bottle on top of it. After the formation was completed, the next step was to prepare the materials. After the materials were placed inside, the magic circle made of blood lit up with a bright red light. The brightness of the magic circle continued to increase till it reached its limit. The circle, containing the carcass, opened like a gate. Loren felt silver manes sprouting all over his body. Loren's body, which he couldn't control, involuntarily collapsed to the ground. Combined with the changes in his appearance, Loren now seemed to have truly transformed into a silver wolf. Loren's mental panic made him crawl helplessly on the ground. The reason Loren woke up again was because someone stretched out a finger and gently poked his cheek. Loren struggled to his feet from the magic circle, and Eleanor smiled happily when she saw that he was all right. She reached out and took Loren's hand, pulling him up from the ground and explaining. Brushing the dust off his clothes, Loren then asked about the question that had puzzled him the most. Upon hearing the girl's words, Loren closed his eyes and began to sense his own body. Loren, who was wearing a brown leather jacket today, was walking forward. Gurgle, Citersnessus. The silver-haired girl turned her head, saw Loren's strange look, tilted her head, and explained. Loren nodded knowingly, then looked around curiously. Just then, Eleanor seemed to remember something important, turned to look at Loren, and asked curiously. When the topic turned to business, Loren quickly nodded and responded earnestly. Just then Eleanor, who was leading the group, and had been humming an unknown song, suddenly paused and stopped. Realizing he had reached the end, Loren curiously raised his head and turned his gaze toward his desk. All sorts of people were sitting on both sides of the street. Upon seeing the lively scene before him, Loren was momentarily stunned, then remembered and smiled happily. Loren followed Eleanor into the crowd, and they entered the bustling market together. Eleanor patted her head, then turned to Loren and said seriously. Loren, annoyed, reached out and grabbed a small device on the table next to the sofa. Loren then reached into a bag beside the sofa, pulled out 2 batteries, inserted them, and pressed a button. Loren then reached into the large bag next to the sofa. Enlightenment potion is a lost art, requiring a variety of rare herbs and soundful craftsmanship to create. The vast majority of items in these ruins are beyond the knowledge of most people. Loren touched his nose, pulled the huge bag in front of him, and began to examine its contents. After so long, these things have finally arrived by express delivery today. In this respect, they are quite similar to the giant war puppet, essentially miniature versions of it. In reality, this is a puppet, made from clay. This is the lowest grade magic puppet. Some were carrying clay into the furnace, while others were adding fuel and starting a fire. A girl with long sky blue hair walked in with a calm expression. Loren took the paper as instructed, glanced at it briefly, and then nodded in approval. After placing the documents face down on the table, Loren withdrew his hand and gently twisted it. Several A4 sheets of paper, covered with neat writing, fell out. Loren used the stapler next to him to staple them together, then gently weighed them and arranged them. Loren then looked up and began to read the information on the papers carefully. Arashia shook her head, helplessly, while Elena continued to intently examine the text before her, searching for its contents. After chatting with Arashia, Loren, smiling, turned his head and met the girl's earnest gaze. Loren was taken aback by this unexpected answer. Loren never expected to have someone around him who genuinely understood this area. Finally, putting down her pen, the black-haired girl looked up at the astonished Loren. The black-haired girl nodded and spoke in a serious tone. After reading his friend's thesis and handling some miscellaneous tasks at the manor, Loren began his work for the day. Lying on the table was a strange prop that resembled a skeleton. The science of this world is very different from the science of Loren's previous life. Rather, it is more similar to the magic of this world. Finally, they further created the mechanics, who can now stand on the same level as magicians and warriors. Most of them were given to him by Varen. A few others were books that could also be purchased in the Maxix Empire. After opening the topmost booklet, Loren found the corresponding section and read the text. To cut it steadily, a special knife is required. After examining it carefully once more, Loren nodded in satisfaction, then picked up the knife and began to cut again. According to Elena, the cargo ship was loaded with a lot of important goods. Loren had already provided as much extra help as he could. With a helpless rub of his head, Arashia turned around and left. After yawning, Loren jumped off the rock and turned to walk towards his villa. Loren still has many things to study carefully. After paying the wages to the workers who complete the construction, Elena walked into the newly built building. Upon entering, one is greeted by a small, airtight room, about 1/10 the size of the outer warehouse. Upon hearing the tall woman's question, Elena smiled gently. Upon hearing Elena's voice, the tall woman frowned slightly. A moth floated slowly in the air. Loren looked up and watched the bright red moth before him, resembling a flame, flapping its wings incessantly. When the topic turned to system time, Loren looked up, blinked, and the system panel reappeared before his eyes. Currently, Loren's system has 2 main functions. Its first and earliest function was to unlock the power of previously unknown, contained entities by collecting intelligence points. The second function is the task system. Loren had already completed 2 tasks. Loren also unlocked a personal panel that allowed him to observe and capture his current state. Since arriving in this world, Loren has witnessed death. Loren used his magic to form a hand. Once enough sparks are collected, they can be fused together to create a completely new flame. After some time, something that didn't seem to have a big impact on the surface, but was quite important, happened. A member of the Ikra family arrived at the starting point. Loren tapped the paper a few times with his finger, then continued. Arashia nodded in agreement, and Loren then continued. Arashia took the table and glanced at it briefly. According to magical detection, the former's data was quite impressive, in many aspects, enough to compete with these famous products. The content is similar to Loren's table, recording various data, and providing detailed analysis of specific agricultural details. Along with this form, a large stack of various documents was also submitted. Arashia turned away happily, while Loren sighed and took a book out of her desk. Combined with the room's coincidental lighting, it created such a beautiful scene. The head maid, who never seemed to be resting, and appeared to be constantly working, was diligently cleaning the floor. After wandering around the villa, the girl left and walked onto the land called the Land of Beginning. Since the massive earthquake created a great river that traverses the land, this field has become incredibly fertile. The sounds were clearly masked by special magical means. The other girl also wore a beret and wore a half smile. The most obvious difference was that while both had black hair, this girl had waist-length hair. Even though there was no ladder or stairs, the girl easily climbed to the roof of the Uranus villa. The sound of the door being kicked open was accompanied by Loren's incessant coughing. Lyriel and her companions were also attracted by the lively scene, and even Eleanoa curiously peeked out. Belle grabbed a rag soaked in healing potion and began wiping Loren's body. Loren silently observed the approaching group, then sighed, took a green potion from the ring of Floga, and drank it. The wooden table was completely shattered. One end of the pipe is fitted with several small cables. When the 3 metal plates are joined together, they resemble a hard claw. Belle found a spare chair and table in the basement. Loren raised the paw, examined it closely, and then sighed. Before the Villa Uranus, a rather large project was underway. Upon seeing that these 2 life forms had accomplished such a great task, everyone present spontaneously burst into applause. After some time, the white dog has grown even bigger. While the children were playing with their pets, most of the adults were observing the newly erected water wheel. The original starting point was just a poor land, unsuitable for cultivation, and lacking non-renewable resources, such as minerals. Water is scooped from the rivers, and with a few simple operations from the farmers, it can irrigate the fields. The continuous whirring of gears seemed to symbolize the immense potential this system held. Loren then looked up and stared intently at the cargo ship that was gradually sailing away. After leaving the villa in Uranus, Loren hummed an unknown song as he walked to the riverbank. The huge cargo ship has disappeared, but a sailboat still floats on the river today. Compared to that enormous mechanical monster, this ship is nothing more than a small boat on the ocean. Seemingly hearing the approaching footsteps, the tall woman gazing at the sailboat turned around. Upon seeing Loren's arrival, she gently lowered her head and gave a polite bow. Inside was a black card with 4 gold horizontal lines drawn on it. The tall woman smiled slightly, then said goodbye to Loren and turned to leave. The leader, Lyriel, stared wide-eyed at the boy before her, her voice tinged with doubt. Most of their time was free, which they could use to train themselves or seek out adventures. To be honest, this treatment was so good that even the girl herself felt a little embarrassed. Upon hearing those 2 words, Lily's eyes were already filled with excitement. Loren tilted his head and watched the 4 girls run out of the door in a flash. Loren had started preparing for this long journey a week ago. The ocean is the largest monster empire on this continent. Nevertheless, Loren still wanted to make more preparations in advance. Loren had already walked to a very familiar small door. Loren, unsure whether the other person was making a dirty joke or simply stating a fact, gave an awkward laugh. Loren was a little surprised that the other party could guess his thoughts so quickly. Before Loren could explain, the other party gave another swift and concise response. Loren was standing on the lookout tower of the 2-masted sailing ship called Ristum. After experiencing it for a full minute, Loren opened his eyes and nodded in satisfaction. Loren was initially worried about this situation. Loren had learned that one of the benefits of increasing vitality was immunity to minor ailments like motion sickness. After a happy laugh, Loren continued walking forward. Eventually, reaching the very front of the ship, an old man was standing at the bow of the boat. Loren crossed his arms across his chest, a tattered pipe dangling from his mouth. The other leg was even more blatant, because it wasn't flesh and blood at all, but a long, slender harpoon. Loren took a step forward, and stood beside the old man, looking ahead. Upon hearing Loren's request, Captain Baham nodded, and then snapped his fingers. A taciturn, dark-skinned man standing next to Baha nodded, and walked to where the old man had just been. The old man and Loren then turned around and walked toward the nearest hut. On the table were 2 maps. Rubbing his head, Loren looked at some unmarked areas on the second map, with a troubled expression. The old man relit his pipe, exhaled smoke rings, and looked at Loren with his cloudy eyes. Violetta hummed a song, pleased with her spoils, while Lyriel watched with envy, as several large fish thrashed about. The owner of the voice was a burly man. Several holes in the uniform had been sewn up with rather clumsy needlework. Elfrena, who was standing nearby, gave a brief explanation and then spoke. Upon hearing Elfrena's explanation, Siger raised an eyebrow in agreement, and the placed blue siskel dragonfish back on the deck. Upon hearing that there was food to eat, Lyriel and Violetta stretched out their hands and cheered. While the Ristoff was traveling at a decent speed, it wasn't exactly slow either. Moreover, there were still many unknowns along this adventure route, meaning that some dangers might be lurking within. Dozens of dark black pipes are installed on its standard circular body. One end of these pipes is connected to the glass furnace. Loren walked up to the furnace and pulled open the 2 small valves installed in front of the furnace door. For a magician, experiencing the atmosphere of their surroundings is also an important part of their learning. After confirming that everything was safe, Loren nodded, then climbed out from underneath and returned to the deck. Loren came up, looking for someone, and he found them quickly. Loren had no idea how she got up there. The huge anchor had just been dropped from under the ship by the taciturn. Loren had once visited the powerful magical beast empire of the Belixmi Mountains. The old man exhaled another smoke ring and then began to explain. From Loren's observation of them, the old man named Bahamut was the leader and teacher of the other 2. Loren lowered his head and stared directly at the deck of the Ristom. Loren's gaze passed over the deck and was fixed on something inside the cabin. When history is long enough and there is enough material, even the most improbable events will occur and be recorded. By this time, the deck was already crowded with people. Lily and the other 3 had already raised the 4 weapons they had bought with loans. Crow and Tindalos were still vomiting, with their heads in the buckets. Loren glanced around the deck and quickly realized he was the last to stand up. Upon hearing Loren's voice, Baha exhaled smoke rings as he gave a reminder. Loren didn't even have time to turn his head. Even without the captain's prompting, Loren could already keenly sense that the Sestance environment was different from yesterday. In this deliberately created, slightly frightened atmosphere, many people shrank and showed expressions of fear. Just then, after finally vomiting up everything in his stomach and returning to normal, Crow raised his pale head. The instant Klaus shouted those words, Lyriel, who was closest to him, swiftly swung the scythe she had been holding. The red flash was faster than the blue one, easily pinning the sharp sword to the deck. Without the cover provided by speed, the true form of the sudden flash of light was revealed. Its size was truly tiny, only the size of Loren's palm. It could easily be described as miniature. Yet, even such a small fish was enough to instill fear in everyone on the ship. At Baha's command, the sails mounted on the mast were fully unfurled. With Baha's command, the entire ship was mobilized and charged forward. A lone boat has sailed to the middle of the river. The blonde boy and the black-haired youth, cleaning up the vomit, looked up in confusion. The 3 of them turned their heads at the same time and focused their gaze on a certain place. When the fog was shattered by lightning, the once calm ocean instantly surged with violent waves. The monster that suddenly attacked was actually countless small bluish-green fish. Each one the size of a palm was like a puzzle piece. The most important reason is their terrifying number, which proliferates infinitely like cells. The enormous blue-green demonic fish before them was the result of a battle involving nearly 1,000 devourers. In reality, this was a very, very small group of devourers. The moment the demonic fish that the devourer had transformed into was repelled by the shield, Loren smiled. On the first deck of the ship, the taciturn, dark-skinned sailor, who had disappeared at some point, arrived. The ferocious demon fish screamed, as if it was pierced through a huge hole. Some of the devourers were instantly killed by the purple laser, while the remaining devourers fell from the sky. Some of the farther ones turned and fled after falling into the water. Taking this opportunity, Loren stretched out his right hand and tried out a new spell he had recently learned. As Loren pulled with his 5 fingers, the flat space was grasped like a piece of cloth. Loren twisted his hands, and the space was pulled and twisted accordingly. The rest is not something Loren needs to handle. Loren took out the pipe. Captain Baham's cheerful idea was easily destroyed. Loren was stunned when he saw it. Before Loren crossed over to this world, he was very curious about and longed to see a magical beast. Its black wings blotted out the sun, and its emerald green eyes were like enormous jade or beacons, illuminating everything. Its white teeth were like mountains, and its black scales were like armor. The creatures that existed only in legends in the previous world have finally blossomed and borne fruit in this world. Located in the sky, the giant dragon slowly opened its mouth, and then exhaled a terrifying wind. The once calm river was once again stirred up by the monster's appearance. Lyriel, holding the scythe, was already stammering. The black dragon, high above, looking down with its emerald green eyes mercilessly surveying the sailboat, which resembled an ant. Loren raised his head, using all his strength to resist the dragon's oppressive aura. Loren's thoughts had to be interrupted before he could even get to the bottom of things. The old captain, who was steering the ship, dared not be negligent in the slightest. The moment they saw the dragon, they were already prepared to do everything in their power to survive. Taking advantage of the black dragon's attack being blocked, using it a few times is fine. After flapping its wings to raise its position once more, the dragon raised its head and swung it around. The dragon revealed a sinister smile. Even if only half of them landed on the protective shield, it was enough to shatter the purple shields. To counter the attacking dragon, the magic cannon charged up again, and a second purple beam was fired. Faced with 3 attacks coming at once, the black dragon seemed to have put away its carefree attitude. After nimbly turning 360 degrees in the air, the dragon roared, and nimbly raised its not-so-long hind claws. The dragon opened its jaws and long snout, from which a fiery orange sphere was born. Normally, a few young magicians would have no chance of resisting such ultimate power. The storm is facing the biggest crisis since it set sail. The dragon's initially disdainful gaze turned serious. The girl was met with a fireball that resembled the sun. The dragon, enraged by the repeated failures of its attacks, opened its lower jaw, allowing flames to condense within it. The gem vanished into dust the moment it left the girl's fingers. Simultaneously, accompanied by an explosion in the seawater, massive tentacles slowly rose from the whirlpool. 7 tentacles, a force capable of crushing the storm, and its protective shield with just one, appeared. Eleanor gave a wry smile, then extended her hand. Before Loren could even react to what was happening, he sensed a change in the scenery around him. The surrounding scenery instantly became bright and clear. The entire stormy seas took off. In an instant, the deck was filled with all sorts of wails from men and women. The young boy suddenly had a dream today. The unrestrained child was freely expressing himself, playing freely as a child. Unbeknownst to us, time passed, the sun set, the moon rose, and darkness took over the world. Loren found himself in a state of utter loneliness. Loren then slowly lifted himself up and stood up again. Loren was captivated by her beautiful face for a while, compared to Arashia, who looked like Sleeping Beauty. Chloe's pose was quite awkward. Loren's limbs were spread out in a rather ugly position, and his head was completely buried in his tindassos. Loren turned his muddled mind over again, then pieced together what had happened in his head. Loren began to carefully observe his surroundings, trying to gather clues about what had happened after he fainted. Upon smelling the aroma, Loren frowned, then strode towards the source of the smoke. Loren kept his eyes fixed on the source of the smoke. Loren also saw a man sitting on the beach. Loren approached, with a slightly nervous expression, while Eleanor smiled and handed over the freshly grilled fish. Loren turned around, his body tensing slightly, and cast a nervous glance toward the forest. Upon hearing the voice, Loren first looked at the 5 men with curiosity. Loren was met with the javelin he had thrown. With the addition of several ornaments, it became a slender spear in Loren's hand. Loren held his magic spear horizontally to block the powerful spiked club. The 4 men who surrounded Loren's asked him to stop thinking his attention on resolving the immediate battle. The spiked club was thrown back by the immense force. Finally, they slowly lowered their bodies, put all 4 feet on the ground, and roared again. After transforming into beasts, the already strong savages gained even greater power. In terms of strength, attack, and habits, they had become true monsters. Moreover, it was a 5-on-1 situation, and if the fight continued, it would be extremely disadvantageous for Loren. Magicians are the most versatile superhuman beings. Fireballs appeared in Loren's hands. Fear of fire is the nature of wild animals, even those transformed from humans. The wild bull let out a miserable cry and was sent flying several meters away. Loren simply raised his head and stared at the enormous brown bear with unwavering eyes. As Loren's eyes grew deeper, not only the brown bear, but also the other 4 wild beasts, became increasingly heavy-footed. Rather, the fact that they were not crushed to death under these circumstances was enough to demonstrate their incredible endurance. Finally, with their limbs weakened, the 5 wild beasts collapsed to the ground, unconscious. The continuous use of powerful magic had also taken a toll on Loren's spirit. Crow then realized that the white fur was actually his pet Tindalos. Crow was in a very simple house. Lyriel was excitedly jumping around the silver-haired girl, her eyes sparkling. The silver-haired witch leaned against the wall, seemingly unaware of what had happened. The small house in front of them was not built of wood or bricks. The wounds from Loren's cuts, slashes, and burns were simply bandaged with scraps of cloth. In this condition, they should have been resting in bed. Just moments ago, it was this old man who stopped Loren from suddenly attacking. In addition to these 2 largest and most powerful nations, there are countless, independent small countries scattered around the world. Loren was left alone in the room again. After rubbing his eyes, Loren carefully examined the parchment in front of him, and his eyes became even brighter. Just one look is enough to tell that these cuts were not made by chopping with an axe or saw. Loren used his human hands to lift an axe. For the latter too, it was the first time they had ever seen this amazing new extraordinary profession. As if it were part of an apology, the old man nodded in approval. In addition, they are divided into different sequences, based on their rarity and effects. Second sequence ores are a level above in value. Upon hearing this, Loren curiously walked up to the car and opened the metal box. Inside were neatly arranged smelted ore ingots. The gold was arranged neatly. After regaining his serious expression, Loren took out a map from his pocket and put on a focused expression again.